Now, remember, the NVIDIA latest data center will use more power than New York City on a peak day, every single day.
Wow, where's that one?
It's in Texas.
Holy hell.
Yeah, Chevron is building a baby gigafactory with Chevron that does 530,000 homes. I mean, we're talking
that is a
absolutely
fascinating
massive. So Ireland, a third of all of Ireland's power right now goes to the data centers. A third of the entire country's.
This is general advice and my opinions only. CFDs are high risk, past performance isn't reliable. I may be long or short CFDs and stocks mentioned. Content may contain language that offends some viewers. LEVRD operates as corporate authorised representative 001318377 under AFSL 548573. You can find our financial services guide via the LEVRD website link in the show notes.
Righto, bag holders and stop loss haters, we're heading into the battery world. Brought to you by Mine and Select, the go-to mining recruitment in Australia for the mining industry. We've got a legend from across the ditch. Mate, I don't know if you've had as good of an intro of that in your history. Ken Hoffman, illustrious career, buy side, sell side, copper trading, battery expert, McKinsey, and mate, let's set the precedence for the interview.
Yeah.
Will lithium be the dominant chemistry?
Yes. Lithium stands on the periodic table with its losing and gaining of an electron better than any other material. So I'm a scientist, lithium sits there better. From a commercial standpoint, there's more lithium in the world than copper. So what are we producing? 22, 23, 24 million tons of copper. We're producing 2 million tons of lithium. So we could produce 10 to 15 times as much lithium and we'd be fine. The question has never been, is the earth ready? The question is, do we have enough refining capacity at the right cost ready? And that's sort of been the problem at the end of the day, is that mismatch. Whenever we've seen a boom, we know it takes 18 to 24 months for the Chinese to sort of just get those refineries up and running. But there's always a mismatch. And I think there's a mismatch now where because of AI driving battery demand, and people didn't see that coming, and there could be several legs to this, not only stationary storage, but I've been at some VC funds and they have these NASA guys there and they start talking about these robotics and making hundreds of millions of these things. Robots are basically batteries with some sticks hanging out of it. I mean, that could be another leg up. And I sort of asked them, like, we've seen these Boston robotic things jump from box to box for years. Like, why is it now we see armies of these things in China? And it all comes back to AI. And what the guy told me is like, look, before you'd have the robot grab this glass and put it back and grab it, but then it gets slightly off and it doesn't know what to do. But now AI says, aha, the glass is moved. I need to move my hand a certain way. It has to have so much pressure on each finger. That computational increase that AI has given the world all of a sudden opens up drone technology. You can see Ukrainians using it. To robotics. The one guy at NASA, he just sold 50,000 massive robots to weld ships in Korea because ship welding is a really hard skill and they can't get people. So they buy 50,000 of these things. They're 300 kilos each. 200 kilos is a battery. So there's so many different sets. Now, again, I think we're going to see AI come into a day that it's going to have a really bad part because I think this is a bubble of all bubbles. But until we get there, it's happy days for lithium in this space.
Well, all the lithium we've talked about previously has been lithium in big batteries, but as you're saying, there could be millions and millions of smaller batteries.
That's right.
Into the market as another leg.
There's a lot of different types of batteries. You know, I was in Korea seeing a drone maker. Ukraine buys 100,000 drones a month right now, but they're all types. They're not just the just boom, boom, I need one cycle. They have batteries that do heat seeking because they want to see where the troops are. They have drones that look under the ground for tunnels and stuff. They have weather, there's dozens of different types of drones and attributes, and they all some need a lot of power, some need to last a long time, some need to be in super cold climates. So there's a lot of different types of batteries out there. All of them, or most of them, use lithium because, again, it's pretty good, but they use different anodes, they use cathodes, et cetera.
Yeah, you put your cock on the block a lot with price calls. Plenty right, plenty wrong, but actually putting it out there is a big thing. So we'll start with the good ones, obviously. The lithium price, I guess you picked the bottom last year before the market did. So we'll talk in Chinese carbonate prices. So it's gone from 61,000 a tonne June last year to 148,000. And I think it was up in the 160s earlier this year. So I guess what did you see in the data that pointed you in that direction before the market did.
Yeah, there's a good friend of mine, Cormac O'Larry, out of Hong Kong, that publishes monthly Japanese battery production numbers. I'm still waiting for him to do July, and I think July will be up 60+ % year over year. What I was looking at, when I think the analysts in lithium were not looking at, was the demand. You know, they could see the supply, they could see the oversupply. I was seeing numbers oversupply to 2033. But when I saw last year, in the first half of last year, Japanese or Chinese battery production was up, I think, 56%. That's 2.5 SQMs. And so I sort of didn't care about the oversupply at that point. You're talking 2.5 SQMs, the world's largest lithium provider. So when I saw that, I saw, again, the Earth has way too much lithium. That's not a problem. But the Earth has a refining problem. And so when you see a big spike in demand, it takes refiners a while to sort of catch up when the demand is that strong. We've seen this 2 times before. It takes the Chinese about 18 to 24 months to bring that new supply on, of refining supply on. But I knew at that point, first of all, you're talking, lithium carbonate prices were $8,000 US, way below anybody else's. You're talking well into the cost curve. So you did see a lot of capacity shut in. You knew that would take a little while to get going again. You could see the demand going there. I knew it was AI. I didn't know why. But I knew when I was because I would visit China and all these guys were like, stationary storage AI, stationary storage AI. I now know that problem is electricity problem. The world is incredibly short electricity. And so when you run out of electricity, the only way you can get more is everybody has these gas peaker plants, run them 24/7 and load up reservoirs of electricity. So you used to have reservoirs of oil, now you have reservoirs of electricity. And that's why everyone's building these batteries. The mistake I had was I was right on the lithium part. I was right on the AI part. I know more about, I work with a company now called Pulse Intelligence that does instantaneous mine asset databases from all around the world, junior level work. It's unbelievable how quick it can do this stuff and put so many junior guys out of work. It's really amazing. But on the other hand, I didn't realize how quick AI was coming to market. And so I had thought my theory was sort of twofold. One, lithium's going to be good, AI is going to be good, stationary storage is going to be good, but geopolitics, I really thought the tariffs that the U.S. was putting on the world would have a terrible. I mean, tariffs have never been good for the global economy in history. I still don't think they are. So I said, all right, 2026 is going to be down. I thought copper would be shit. And then I said, in 2027, AI is going to happen. The difference where I was completely wrong was AI came much, much forward. The U.S. is going to spend over $1 trillion on AI. I never thought that was possible. That's the whole reason the U.S. economy is even growing this year is AI.
Yeah.
And you look at Korea where they're paying $400,000 an employee to me. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. The price of a DRAM has gone from $2.70 US to $70 in the past 2 years. I went to buy a 16-bit thing for my computer because I'm out of memory. And I went into Claude and I'm like, what do I need? My computer's really slow. It's like, you need to buy this 16. In December of 2025, that averaged on the internet $50. I go up to buy it. It's $400. Like, oh, geez. Yeah. When people got excited about AI, they're just building, which is sending the prices. On the flight over here, I actually sat next to a guy who buys gas generators. He's going all around the world to buy gas generators. And he's like, you can get them, but he goes, the price has gone from $25 million to $150 million for the same gas turbine. So the world is fighting for electricity.
And the storage of it, I guess, like you've talked about the legs that haven't come to fruition yet for lithium, but the big one that has is stationary storage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you go back to 2020, and the reason why analysts didn't look at stationary was in 2020, stationary was only 8% of the size of EVs. Everyone's just looking at EVs. And I can see what the analysts were looking at. Trump hates EVs, and EVs in the U.S. are dead. So we're looking into 2025. All right, EVs are dead. Maybe the rest of the world grows a bit. We have this oversupply anyways. It's going to take a long time for the U.S. to catch storm. But they weren't looking at stationary, which was 8% of the EV size in 2020. Even in 2023, it was only about 18% of the size of EVs. But then 2024 went to about 25%. 2025, it went to over 50%. And then this year will probably be over 60% of the differential between stationary storage and EVs. And you can't really track stationary. You only have to look at battery demand because the Chinese aren't giving you very good numbers on stationary, but they are giving you good numbers as far as I know on battery production. And you can see when the LFP numbers were like this, It wasn't going into EVs. It was going into stationary. So that's why I sort of backwards said the stationary thing is much, much larger than people think, and that was the demand pull.
And you've pretty much said that within the next 2 years, stationary is likely going to eclipse EV for
I mean, I have it in my
content.
model. I have by 2030, I have it equal EVs 3 terawatts and stationary 3 terawatts. Could it go above? Yes, easily could. The growth rate is unbelievable. The question is whether it grows more than EVs and being more than EVs or not, all depends on AI. I don't know when the music stops on AI. I mean, when you have NVIDIA lending its balance sheet to its customers to buy its own equipment, those stories don't end well. And I think we all know that. But the story is this, as one of I used to work with a guy, Ken Brockovic, who was head of prop trading at Goldman when I worked at Galleon. And he used to say, I'd say, like, this is crazy. It can't go any higher. And he goes, Ken, whatever can go crazy can go 2 times crazy. I don't know when this stops. And so many people are getting killed on the shorts here because, does SpaceX make any sense whatsoever at this valuation at a 28 trillion, addressable market when the entire world's economy is like 26 trillion? It doesn't make any sense, but it is. Like you look at the numbers, it's there. I mean, you can't fight it. So I don't know when it stops. Until it does stop, I think all the stuff is just soaking up all the metals around to try to build this stuff.
Well, before we go, interesting you mentioned SpaceX. How much does putting stuff in a model change if old Elon starts putting data centers into outer space that are using energy from the sun that he's talking about? That's a long way away. Yeah. But that's like, it's trying to think in this market, like, okay, what can break this? It's things like that, but they're not going to be happening in the next couple of years.
Doesn't seem so. And you go to a lot of these VC funds. I mean, there are people vehemently against saying that doesn't make like the how do you dissipate the heat in space? Apparently, it's very hard. How big do these arrays have to be to do these things? Like just massive. So they think it's sort of like in quiet corners, like he's just raising this money to go to Mars. Like he doesn't really intend. It's sort of like some of his, driverless cars. Imagine you bought a Tesla 10 years ago and you're going to get driverless cars any minute. Now he finally is coming out with driverless cars. Oh, well, car we built it 10 years ago doesn't have all the sensors. Like it's worthless. I mean, he's known for over-promising and under-delivering.
With the stationary storage, how much of it's been China? I guess the big couple of things there, they scrapped their mandatory storage with renewables in Feb 25, and then January this year they introduced that the capacity payment for the stationary storage. So the policy stuff in China, how much is that driving the stationary demand versus the rest of the world?
So China last summer put in about a 3.5 trillion yuan emergency order for stationary. You knew something was up, and if you want the key to what I do and the moves I make, I have had some good calls, and where I've had good calls, I just watching China and say whatever happens in China is going to happen. But March of last year, Iberia and Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula went down. The whole grid went down. I met with government officials in Spain and Portugal shortly thereafter, and they blamed AI for this. AI is not just electricity, but it's a very destructive electricity. So if you were to look at Google searches, and Amazon at a recent conference showed Google searches sort of draw energy very, very consistently. It's just very consistently. AI is really disruptive, and my wife runs 13 global websites for a big international company, and she has 23,000 pages of data on her sites. She said, I can watch when a Google search comes in. It takes 900 milliseconds, and it takes like 5 to 8% of the data. Comes in, sort of looks, picks and touch, okay, and then it takes it. She can see when AI comes into her system because it takes all 23,000 pages in 4 milliseconds. So it's gigantic in taking all the data out. Yep. That's very, very disruptive to a grid. A grid wants stability. And so these things are coming in and out. And so going back to Spain and Portugal, they said AI took down their grid. Not that it specifically took down their grid, but it made their grid incredibly unstable. And that they don't know if it was a cloudy day or if it was a Russian hack, but the whole grid went down. Fast forward to this July, you had the U.S. 4th of July is one of our 3 really big holidays. Everything's shut. So the PJM, which is the largest grid in the U.S., it's like Michigan down to Virginia over to Maine. It's this huge, I think it's like 13 different states. It was like 30, 31, so it was pretty warm. And they were saying to us, They came out afterwards and said, had it not been a national holiday and all offices were closed, all industry was closed, they set an all-time record for demand. And had it been a normal working day, the grid in the U.S. would have gone down. And they went back and said, oh, Virginia is the world's super center for AI data centers. That was the reason that's making the PJM so unstable. And so you're really seeing AI becoming such a force in the need for electrons that it's making all these grids unstable. And what am I going to do if I know I need a lot more electricity? I think U.S. electricity demand didn't grow from 2020 to 2023. We're going to, bulbs that go 5 watts of power versus 80, type of thing. So power demand's like this, 4.5% last year, probably 5% this year. All right, I need a lot more electrons. I'm not building a coal-fired power plant if anybody even knows how to build one anymore.
Or allowed to.
I mean, I know the uranium guys are really excited about popping nukes and stuff, but I haven't seen one. They're always 5 years out. So then what do I have? I have gas. All right. I sat next to this guy in the plane coming out. I said, I want to buy a large gas peaking plant. He goes, you'll get it in 7 years. So what do I do? And what Elon Musk, who I rarely agree with on things, but this I agree is like, here's what you do. Every country on earth has gas peaking plants. They've all put them in. Run them 24/7, build massive battery backup. And that's what they're doing. They're filling up these reservoirs of electricity to give them overall increase in electricity supply. But globally last year, Tesla made 11,000 of their 2XL packs. They're the size of railroad cars. I ran some calculations using Claude, and it said you would need about 500,000 of these things to get 4% more power in the U.S. So it's huge battery demand, and that's what you're seeing. And the Chinese are there. They're the masters of this. They've been making a lot and then exporting a lot of it. You saw the Middle East really buy a lot of battery backup storage. You're seeing Europe. And again, I get the question on this sort of tour I'm doing, but it takes a long time to permit these things. I'm like, when I went to Spain and Portugal and they collapsed, they put out huge orders for battery backups. And the locals are saying, it's about 5 years because you got to find the land and go through this thing and get the permits. When you're about to lose power, which is the lifeblood of any economy, it took them 6 months because they just went into the meetings and said, guys, build it. Like, stop. Like, no, you don't have the opportunity to object. You don't have the opportunity to say it doesn't go here. It's going here. Otherwise, our entire economy is going to collapse. And when people see that, and I think the AI people are really coming around. There's all these battery conferences I'm going to. You're seeing Tesla, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and people are like, why are you here? And they're like, we believe in AI. We believe AI is the future. We believe robots are the future. What we don't have is batteries. Like, who's going to make them for you? All right, the rest of the world. There's not one U.S. domiciled battery maker, not one. Europe tried it with Northvolt. They don't have one. You got Panasonic, LG, SK, and that's it. And so now all of a sudden all these countries are saying, I need batteries and I need to build this quick. And you're seeing a huge sort of, whereas you saw a divot away because EVs were dead to battery, now you're seeing this huge rush back in. They're all going to need raw materials, and how all the raw material comes is, comes back to this industry.
Well, how much of the battery demand is power optimization versus power redundancy? Because it sounds like a lot of the batteries are being used due to grid instability, like worst case scenarios. And has it been something you've been able to model when it's being used for redundant purposes more than power generation in a way?
There's sort of levels of batteries. So you go into an AI data center. On top of each stack, you'll have a battery, and that's to regulate sort of the spikiness. Those could even be superconductors. And so each one has a battery pack on top of it. And then the entire of the battery place has an inside sort of battery. That's supposed to be there in case something really goes wrong inside. But when you look at Microsoft gave a huge presentation, so did Turner. Turner builds the most AI data centers in the world. And they both said, now what you're doing is offsite, you're having these massive, we're talking tens of thousands of these gigapacks being put there. And that's because they're going out to the utilities and saying, we need this much power. The utilities we can't guarantee all that power all year long. They're like, okay, we'll build up, say 48 hours of battery of energy demand. Now, remember, the NVIDIA latest data center will use more power than New York City on a peak day every single day.
Wow. Where's that one?
It's in Texas.
Holy hell.
Yeah, Chevron is building a baby gigafactory with Chevron that does 530,000 homes. I mean, we're talking
That is a
absolutely
fascinating
massive. So Ireland, a third of all of Ireland's power right now goes to the data centers. A third of the entire country's energy goes to data centers. So they are building these massive, massive storage things to be there to sort of be this protection. And I think they saw this coming because the PGM, after saying like we almost went down because of AI data centers, now came out and said we're going to. Apparently, they didn't have the capability to tell an industrial customer we're cutting you off. But they came out after this and said, if we ever get the grid so unstable again, we're going to shut your AI data centers down. I think the AI data centers knew that. So we're like, okay, we're going to need like 48 hours or more of battery backup to be sitting there as a pool of electricity in case we get shut down. So I think this is the batteries that they saw needed. I think China saw this 2 years ago, as they always seem to see things, where they're building, like, they're going nuts in AI. So I think it's a batter for the electron.
Yeah. The lithium price at the moment, and I know you're very focused on demand, but the big supply thing at the moment is the Jinqiao mine and what's happening with that. Because I think lithium carbonate it was up to about 162,000 Chinese yuan. It's back down to about 148. But the Jinqiao permitting, seems like the story changes depending on who you read. What do you know about that mine and whether that is going to be turned back on in the near future or not?
I saw you spoke to Tony at Liontown, and I know Tony well, and he I think he had a little bit of background on what he thinks it is. I'll put it this way. When I've met with CATL officials, not specifically about that mine, but I've asked them about their strategy towards lithium. Now, CATL is the world's largest battery maker. They're the world's largest buyer of lithium. And they've talked an awful lot about sodium-ion batteries. And sodium-ion, to me, is not a very good chemistry. It's very low density. It's very expensive. It uses titanium metal in order to help it move electrons back and forth, and titanium metal is very expensive. I said, what is it going on with you and sodium-ion? They basically said, Ken, our biggest cost is lithium. So we are really going to always have things in the marketplace that keep the price of lithium as low as possible. And so I think with this mine, I don't know what's going on with the local politics there, but I think it's sort of talking down the market. They're really trying to, whenever lithium gets a bit ahead of itself, they're really trying to buy themselves time and will come out with these stories. So I don't know whether or not the mine comes on, but I know they're sort of fighting a losing battle in that demand. They continue to add new lines. They continue to add demand. You continue to see that 50 to 60% year-over-year growth, which is just, amazing. You're talking, it took forever for us to get to 1 million tons of lithium demand, 100 years. It took like 3 years to get from 1 to 2 million tons. It may take 2 years to get to 3 million tons. It is really hitting sort of that hockey stick. And CATL is sitting there like, how can we sort of have backup plans, which sodium-ion is really their backup plan? How can we bring new mines on to keep that price? They don't mine prices in sort of the 20. I'm thinking dollars. 20, 25,000. That's fine. They can live with it. They can grow with it. Everyone's making money off of that. What they can't do is have these spikes that they've seen in the past, and that really petrifies them. So when they saw the 8 to 30, 8 to 23, 24,000, whatever it got up to, they panicked. And so they come out and they say, hey, wait a minute, we got the world's biggest mine, come back in. Whether it was really available to come back in, who's going to know? Who's going to challenge them? And then the price sort of goes back down. Now you see it starting to head right back up again. So I think CATL is really trying to get this market understood and sort of conditioned to sort of stay within a certain level. Expect them to get pretty aggressive, I would think, in buying more lithium assets. They've already done that quite a bit. I don't know if those assets will be in Australia or elsewhere, but I think they really want to control the entirety of the value chain because, as they told me, when it went to $60, $70, $80 a kilo, it destroyed their business model, absolutely destroyed it, because they can't pass those price increases through fully. When you go to BYD or you go to one of the big lithium buyers and say, hey, we're going to increase your price by 300%. They're like, no, you're not. And so usually the maker of the battery sucks that up. Maybe they can go back to the lithium guys. And remember, the lithium guys, when times were tough, were like, okay, you don't have to buy our lithium. Well, but wait a minute. So I think CATL as the leader in this, is really trying to condition the market for a relatively stable price.
The supply response, if we just look at the Australian names, do they move the needle in your forecast, much like Bald Hill restarting, Finnis coming back online, PLS looking to P2000's back on the table, same as the Liontown expansion, MinRes going underground at Mount Marion. Is that moving the needle much versus your demand forecasts?
Not really. I think what moves the needle a lot will be direct lithium extraction, which to date has been an abject failure. You have not seen one successful DLE deployment. Now, I believe long-term you will see them learning how to use DLE. I don't think it's any of the current processes. It's not absorbance. It's not ion exchange. Those inherently are very flawed technologies, but I think there's new technologies that people are working on. I sort of hear and I talk to that I think will, but brine I think will, because the world's a carbonate world and not a hydroxide world, I think brine will become really important. There's not enough brine in the world to completely take this market over, so you will always need hard rock. I don't think clay or geothermal ever work. I think those are top of the fourth quartile always. So
as in like Thacker Pass?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at these clay assets, they need so much sulfuric acid. They are building massive sulfuric acid plants, really, really expensive. Those are always going to be your very high cost. Geothermal to me doesn't work at all. It's a really caustic brine under a lot of heat, under a lot of pressures. It has all sorts of issues. I think those are going to be your top of the fourth quartile. Maybe they come to market. Maybe governments sort of give them incentives to stick around. But you're not going to see long-term a lot of clay in geothermal, in my opinion. I think you're going to see all the brines that possibly can be brought on the market if DLE works, and I think it will. I think the hard rock there, you won't see hydroxide ever get too far away from carbonate because at the end of the day, I'm a battery maker. I just need lithium. Remember, carbonate was the first, and it could be used in early low nickel chemistries and LFP. Hydroxide was purely brought on for high nickel. Anything above 80% nickel or more has to use hydroxide because it dissolves quickly. And now if I'm an LFP producer, I'm just taking the cheapest form of lithium. So it could be carbonate or it could be hydroxide. I don't care. So that's why you haven't seen like hydroxide fall too far away from carbonate. It used to get a premium. Now it really is sort of pari passu with it. It's because if I'm making LFP, I'm just taking the cheapest form of lithium. And so it could be carbonate, and then if carbonate gets too high, then I'll switch to lithium back and forth.
Well, where's the technology at from converting your spodumene con directly into carbonate and not going into hydroxide, having the flexibility?
It's still a little ways. I met with a company called Electrolith when I was in Melbourne. They have sort of a process that they're trying to use. It's usually today on sort of the waste streams from the hydroxide plant. It can make a carbonate. Yep. There's a company in the U.S. who's sort of dabbling in sort of that, but for the most part, and there were some companies that want to use carbonic acid to turn spodumene into. I did see a company in Sydney that is trying to do carbonate out of spodumene, and on paper it looked really interesting because it cuts out a lot of the steps. I mean, when you're looking at new technologies, you want things that are simpler rather than more complex and eliminate as many steps as possible. And so you are starting to see at these conferences people coming up with ideas to turn spodumene, and you need to find a technology because otherwise you constantly have to ship your stuff to China. So I think there are some out there, but I was really curious in the company I saw in Sydney. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. But they had a process that they said was pretty low capex that could turn spodumene into carbonate at the mine site. If you find that, that's a real holy grail for the hard rock industry.
Yeah. I was chatting to someone at Diggers about Zimbabwe. I think because they banned concentrate exports in February, but then eased it in April, and they had quotas. But it was funny, they said they were over there, and they said even when this export ban was on, there just seemed to be a lot of trucks still trucking lithium to the ports. Is it still getting out when it was banned?
I would assume it was. I mean, I have no inside information there, but I would assume it was. I mean, I think the governments can probably get the majors to sort of fall in line, and what they're trying to do is get as much value add, pretty much similar to what Indonesia's playbook has been with nickel. But the smaller guys, probably if you pay the right guy, can you get it on a boat and get it out there? Yes. And so I think that probably is always going to be the case. But I do think it sort of slows. What that will do is if you do see another lithium spike, it will slow the supply response because the majors are going to sort of be stuck in that, and they probably have a harder time. Whereas before, you're right, just put it on a boat and we'll ship it to China. And, and that was sort of the thing. It's funny. On the upside, you get all these guys who say, do you know how hard it is to make lithium? And it's such a bespoke metal, and you don't understand how hard it is. And then on the way down, it's like, do you know how easy it is? And on the way up, it was, or on the way down, well, prices have to, they can't go below 35,000 because the lepidolite is going to be all turned off. They didn't turn it off. So I think you sort of just have to be, the price over the last decade has been in dollars, $21,000. I think $20,000 to $25,000 is the long-term average. But we remember only about 5% of lithium is spot traded. And the price of lithium is based on spot. So if I'm at Fast Markets or SMM, I'm doing the pricing services, I'm calling 8, 9 guys and saying, what are you paying? But this is such a small part of the market. And they try to make it better by throwing out the high numbers and throwing out the low numbers and trying to get the average. But it's a very small amount of the market in a relatively small metal that is driving the price. And that's why you get this volatility, because whenever the price starts moving up, particularly the Chinese, they like to buy inventory. And so all of a sudden you get this really, exaggerated moves on the upside. And then when they're done and they start selling off their inventory, you get the exaggerated moves on the downside. It does even out, but boy, is it painful on the up and the down.
Do you think the chaos, the more this global lithium market becomes established, is the chaos going to be a bit less, not as sensitive as it is now? Because it's still just even the move this year, like the fact that something can triple, that's chaotic.
Hey, wait, it went up 10 times last time.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah.
So it is getting less chaotic.
I mean, could it double from here? Yes.
Yeah.
In theory, you're right. As it becomes more, and lithium has got its issues. You can't really store it. Like you saw the U.S. was going to store lithium. You can't store it. It can only has a shelf life of 18 to 24 months. So I think that's why the U.S. sort of backed off from having, like someone said, like, it's not copper. I can put copper in a warehouse, and if it's stored in the right conditions, it could be good for 100 years. So it can't really be stored. But inventories on a short-term basis can be bet. The Chinese really, I had this great thing. I've been to China since early 90s. And if you ask a Chinese, what is your cost of capital? Because you want to get at how much inventory they could build. They always say the same thing. It's zero. So it's like, hey, I went to U.S. Business School 101. There is a cost of capital because you have to go to the bank to get a loan to buy the inventory. What's your cost of capital? And they go zero. And you have to sort of sit there and, I had a Chinese friend of mine. He goes, Ken, you're being an idiot. You're not thinking the way the Chinese do. If I'm a purchasing manager in China, I don't think the price is going up 2%. I think the price is going up 100%. And if the price is going up 100% or even 40%, the 5% loan from the bank is de minimis to me. So to me, the cost of capital is zero because I'm making a bet on the movement. The issue you have, and we used to see this in the copper market a lot, is everybody does the same thing at the same time. Everyone's on the same WeChat channel, and everyone's saying it's getting – so that's one of the reasons in the lithium market. You just see these swings as you go on the WeChat channel, and they're all real bullish, and boom, 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 they all start buying in, or they're real bearish, which is boom. So that – the Chinese market really driving where a Western manager would say, I have a cost of capital, therefore I can only have my inventory levels at 3 months or whatever it is, and then that's it. They don't play the price move, whereas the Chinese, who are the market, they are the lithium market, they do. And so that's been hard for the West to understand that Chinese mentality on inventory moves, and that inventory moves really comes through in the price.
So if you look away from like Australian hard rocks, like South American brines, and I guess the emerging North American Canadian smackover, and then the Canadian assets as well. Like if you just looked at like Chinese lepidolite and the Zimbabwe material, like there's like it gets a stigma attached to it that it's all shit, but that's not correct, is it? Like there's actually some high quality lepidolite mines. Is that right?
Yeah.
How much of the market is that how much could that supply those areas that everyone's thinking aren't that big of a player?
I mean, I think that material's there again for when the market spikes. I think the Chinese do things lower cost, mainly because they're, the refining technology, they're very, very good at. We did a thing in copper when I was at McKinsey to see, like, why can McKinsey copper smelters just blow away costs for everybody in the West? And our head guy was Sigurd Morels, who's since retired. The guy's brilliant. He's like, because he went over there and he spent like 3 months. And he's like, what he found out is when the Chinese said we're going to build a copper smelter, they could build 30. And so when you build 30 instead of one, you have Hatch come in and do all this, and everything else is very bespoke. So, there's a $2 billion smelter in the U.S. There's a $300 million smelter in China because they're making 30 of them, and they're just cookie cutter doing this. And the refineries were the same thing. They didn't build one refinery. We're thinking in the West of, I'm going to do a Mount Marion, or I'm going to, like, in one-off, very expensive, huge cost overruns, they don't think that way. They're going to build 50 smaller refineries for lepidolite, and it's going to cost them, if we thought the capex would be $100 million, it's going to be 10. And so their cost of capital, they're building these really cheap refiners. And so at that point, even if it is sort of shit product I'm putting through it, I can make money in the marketplace. And I think when you had Tony on, he was sort of saying that, they're just scooping the stuff into a thing and, down it goes, and it's just so cheap. And the hard part for Western analysts is really hard for us to get into China and really they don't want us to see all this stuff. It's sort of their black box. And so it's always been, even in the battery front and stationary storage, I see numbers and they're all over the place because we don't know, because China's just sort of a black, and they're not too eager to tell the world, here's all of our numbers. But I do know, at the end of the day, they did make it, so they were making some money on it. I do think you'll be lower cost if you are a good quality brine, or if you're a good quality, if you're 1.2, 1.3, 1.5%, spodumene opportunity, it's going to be great. So you will have that high cost. I do think it's a very steep cost curve. So I do like clay and geothermal. That's going to be I think that's the stuff that's going to be in and out of the market. I think lepidolite's probably third quartile. I think good hard rock second quartile, and I think brine's always going to be first.
Where's Zimbabwe sitting?
They're probably third quartile.
Yeah. Yeah, and is there much high quality coming out of there or not, or is it unknown a bit?
You need Tim Hoff for that. He's my buddy on all that. He's been to Zimbabwe a ton of times. What I've heard is it's okay.
Yeah,
it's nothing. You're not going to no Western miner would have gone in there and done that.
Yeah.
But the Chinese can find a way to make money off of it.
The copper. You mentioned the electricity use for an NVIDIA server farm, as New York City's power consumption, and you've said 200,000 metric tons of copper that goes into that. And
look, if you look at these things, AI data farms are basically gigantic chunks of copper. And so again, my thesis a year ago was, okay, the economy's going to be shit because tariffs and no one likes that. And then 27, these AI data centers are going to start to get built because of permitting and everything else. Which got pushed way, way, way forward. And not only the server farms themselves, which are a lot of copper, but all the wires. The heat coming off of there's this crazy stuff in these things. They have one of these little server things. They have more heat than a bonfire. So they're submersed in water. And they're just gigantic amounts of copper wiring and copper. They're just ridiculous, let alone the substations and everything else. So the copper needed by these things is astronomical. And I think you're seeing it in the copper price. Again, a year ago, I was like, the U.S. built 1 million tons of copper in inventory. I knew those tariffs probably would sort of be pulled back. So you won't have that 1 million tons come in. The tariffs are going to be bad. All right, we're going to have this down. And the AI just blew that out of the water. It just bought.
And well, I guess with that supply side, we've seen some
you're right, and the supply side has had
blows.
issues.
So the Grasberg mudslide, you had seismic issues at Kamoa-Kakula. El Teniente is running at 27% below what they were last year after their rock burst, and that's big tons. How do you view that supply side?
I would put copper in with lithium. As long as the AI boom continues, I think copper does well. What worries me, though, is when this does turn, because you're seeing a lot, besides the AI economy, which is very large, the rest of I was right in a certain respect. Car sales globally are down. Home sales globally are down. Because of the inflation that we've seen from the Iranian war, you're seeing a lot of pockets of the economy. The non-AI economy looks pretty bad. It's the AI economy that's sort of lifting all the boats, and I'm just afraid when that goes, everything else goes.
Yeah, because you've said that the US doesn't really have a coherent copper strategy, and they're going to need a shitload of it.
Yeah, I mean,
by the sounds.
our
Is that-
one mine is the Resolute mine, but that's still. I mean, I think Trump is trying to push that as quick as possible, but that's still a very long ways away. The U.S. copper strategy is really copper scrap. I was happy because I spoke at a conference and said that the U.S. should ban the exportation of black mass, and they did. They came out last week and they did. So, and I think you'll see black mass and critical minerals start to become more and more very political, and the banning of sort of movement of a lot of these materials. And so copper scrap is probably something you might see the U.S. also ban the exportation of. Sort of let's keep everything we have in-house.
How much is that going to account for, do you think?
It could be. It's pretty significant in the U.S. I mean, it's I'd be lying if I gave numbers, but I think it's a very high number. It's probably 30-40% of U.S. Supply is just recycling.
Another leg you talked about is the robotics, and that's the battery's one side, but the magnets are going to make a huge component of robotics.
That's rare earths.
Yeah.
Rare earths, magnets make everything smaller and more powerful. And rare earths, you have two types of rare earths. You have the light rare earths and the heavy rare earths. So there you have neodymium is your main light rare earth, which is the most common. When you hear rare earth deposits, they almost always have a lot of lights. It's the dysprosium that you have to worry about. That's a heavy rare earth, which is a much smaller percentage of the heavy to light, but it's real hard to find.
And
there's only a few of those. And then once you have those, then can I actually process those? I mean, the Chinese have done a great job at very cheaply processing those rare earths
and controlling it. Like I think they're
completely controlling.
Well, they're 90% of NdPr and 99% of heavies.
Yes, and then even from there is making the magnets themselves. And a few years ago, the Japanese, who are real good makers of magnets, they came out with some new technology. And what I had heard was basically the Chinese said, if you want to build your new technology plants, build them here in China. We'll give you a huge discount on your rare earth prices. Or you can build them in Japan or someplace else, and we have to charge you a premium. So what did they do? They all built them within China. So not only is it the rare earth processing, but it's the magnet making itself is mainly in China. And when you talk about robotics and drones and missiles and everything else, that's all rare earths, and the rest of the world's really lacking.
How do you look at the pricing of it? Like, I guess with the three recent deals you had, like in the Western side, like MP Materials with the DoD, you had Linus with Japan, Linus with Department of War, and it seems like that US $110 a kilo price floor has been used throughout. How do you look at rare earth pricing? Is that going to be a bit of a baseline we can work off?
If the U.S. does this, I mean, when I remember when the first rare earth boom happened in, 2011 or so, and all these rare earth miners came out of the woodwork, and the U.S. DoD said, oh, we're going to support you all. And I think at the time it was Japan or China was pissed at Japan for some fishing rights or something like that. So they said, oh, we're going to cut off your electrical computer industry, which they did. And then, so I was at all these conferences and these miners were going nuts. And then they settled their dispute. China just flooded the world with rare earths, collapsed the price, and the U.S. DoD said, I never heard of you guys before. What's going on? And really, MP, which was Mountain Pass, went bankrupt. They all went bankrupt. Now we're back again. So the floor is exactly what a bankable deal needs. I'd be still worried, when a new administration comes into the U.S. and the rare earth price, say, collapses again, will they stick to it? Or will they be like, this is too expensive for us, why are we doing this? And that would just worry me, is the West, China has a 20-year plan and sticks to a 20-year plan. The West has a 2 to 4 year plan and just constantly changes it. And that really makes it difficult for a mine plan and for bankability. And, have things changed? I hope so, but I don't, that would be a risk.
Do you think $110 a kilo is going to bring on new supply in Brazil and other places in the Western world?
Well, you saw Meteoric. It seems like the U.S. government's involved in that. And I've actually got some calls from people looking to bank some deals in those same ionic clays. So, it seems like there's a lot of movement there.
The other side of the battery, we've talked about cathode mostly, the anode. Is anyone going to be making money out of that other than China? Has the Western world sort of conceded the anode to China?
They have, but Exxon is really, they think they really want to get into this business. Phillips 66 is one of the biggest makers of anode inside of China. They made some investments outside of China. I think the oil and gas companies really see this industry, both lithium. You've seen Chevron and Exxon take huge stakes in the Smackover in the U.S. But they also, when you go meet their groups, they have the lithium group and then they have the everything else group. And the everything else group is carbon additives, nanotubes, and anode material. So they all want to get into the space. Again, they can do it all, but who do they sell it to? What the West really needs is some battery makers. Again, they're constantly the three Asians. They don't have anyone to sell to. And so, who's going to do that offtake? And for a while, it was sort of, all right, I'll go to the automaker and I'll get an offtake there. But they didn't really control sort of the battery making. And so you really need to find, and I think if I were the West, I want to bank. Northvolt was an epic failure, but it was sort of the right idea. I think what you're going to need is for Western cell makers to be there so they start building their own infrastructure and their own sort of localization. And then I think these big companies want to supply them with material. So I think now they're learning how to make it. They're doing a lot of their due diligences. They build very large teams. Talk to these. You're talking hundreds and hundreds of people in these divisions at these big oil companies. So they want to do it, but if they don't have a market, they're just not going to put the billions into it to build it. So I think it's chicken and egg type of thing.
And why are they looking to get into it? Is it a byproduct of the graphite's a byproduct of what they're pumping out? Well, I'm clueless on this one. They
actually do believe long term that we move away from oil products to more renewables. Look at China right now. The reason China has been so robust with what's going on with petrol prices is because they bought all these EVs. And, I think now there's 10 or 11 models in China that get 1,000-kilometer range, can be charged as much as 3 minutes. Never have an oil change, never have a transmission problem because they don't have oil or transmissions. EV cars are, at the end of the day, a better form of transportation. You've seen here in Australia, the sales of EVs just go nuts because of the petrol price. And when people buy them, and I'm going around with taxi drivers, they love them. So I think the energy makers are making they're really looking out 30, 40 years. When I talk to the big energy makers or even the big miners, they're like, Ken, give me a 2050 view. So they're looking at this very long term. They do think that there won't no oil. You're going to need chemicals and plastics and sort of all sorts of other things. But they see that sliver that goes towards energy / petrol shrinking significantly. They want to still have their hand in that pot. And so they're trying to understand the raw materials that go into that. And so they've set up these teams and made pretty good investments. They've bought a lot, some very large stakes for pretty significant amounts in the Smackover. And they're looking at sort of these different areas. I know Aramco is publicly out there. They want to get big into this. So they're really trying to look at a very long-term view, not a short-term view, and they think lithium and particularly in carbon, they think they have a sort of an advantage in understanding that. With lithium, they think they bring, particularly in brines, the understanding of dynamics of how the water or brine is moving underneath the earth, because they know that lithium guys don't really understand that. They are sort of looking at hard rock, but they need a technology that can convert that into a final product. And then the anode materials, again, carbon, they think they understand carbon. So you don't see them, seems no interest at all in terms of the base metals. They're like, that's not our game.
Yeah, right. Well, and because China, they banned the export of artificial graphite, and that actually ends 10th of November 2026. So what do you think is going to happen on the 11th of November if that can be exported again?
Again, who are they exporting it to? You have three players. You have LG, SK, and Panasonic. That's it. So what those players are doing, that could move the needle slightly, but it's not like there's 50 cell makers in the rest of the world all trying to lower their cost. That material probably goes to their own companies, like CATL setting up huge stuff in Europe. You've seen a lot of the Chinese set up battery plants in Europe, so it's probably going from Chinese companies to Chinese companies.
I guess when this whole mania started, you'd say nearly the favourite chemistry was nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries, but it seems like your favourite, LMF.
High manganese.
Yeah. So lithium, manganese, iron, phosphate.
Yeah. So
no nickel or small amounts of nickel?
So there's two sort of new chemistries out there, and both of them use a lot of manganese. There's And nickel batteries today, there's a little bit of manganese used. Manganese, from a OEM standpoint, the OEMs have always pushed for high manganese batteries. Why? It's geographically diverse. There's manganese found, you can find it in South America, you can find it in Africa, you can find it here in Australia. So around the world, there's lots of manganese. It's a big market. It's 22, 23 million tons versus, 200,000 tons for cobalt, 4 or 5 million tons for nickel. So, it's a very, very large market, very geologic. So, and it's cheap. It's, $50,000 cobalt, $18,000 nickel. High manganese is $1,700. So, it's a very low-cost, geographically diverse metal. It does really good things in a battery. It works very well in cold weather, and that's really important, particularly for the EV makers, but also stationary storage. It does really good in voltage control. LFP batteries have a very low voltage profile. Manganese can be high profile, high voltage or low voltage. It's pretty cool. And it's low cost. So those are all the positives. The negatives are manganese has a tendency in the battery. So in a battery, you have lithium and just the electrons going back and forth, charge, discharge, charge, discharge. Manganese tends to dissolve in the electrolyte that's moving that lithium back and forth. And if that manganese starts going from the cathode to the anode in that graphite, it mucks it up and it sort of shuts it down. So the amount of times you can charge and discharge it has always been relatively low. I've been a big believer in manganese for years. I gave the opening keynote at PDAC like 4 years ago. I said manganese is the future. This is why. I was waiting for particularly the Chinese to up their game in terms of getting cycles. When I went a year ago, they said they were at 2,500 cycles. So for a car, you need 1,500 cycles. That will give you about a 1 million kilometer range. For stationary, you want 4,000 cycles. There were 2,500 cycles last year. They've been publishing 4,000 to 5,000 cycles today. And I actually met a company called Sepion, which is a private company in the U.S., and they have a specific separator to keep manganese from going from one side to the other. So there's a lot of progress being made. Once I get those cycles, I have the low cost, I have the voltage, I have all those good things, and that's why I've said it's going to move in that direction pretty quickly. You've seen it. Tesla uses a battery called M3P. They've been using it from CATL for 2 years.
Is that 3 parts manganese, 1 part phosphate?
Yeah. You've seen BYD's new 2.0 apparently is a high manganese battery. So you've seen bits and pieces of it. But I think as they work with it better, as the cycles go up, I think you'll see a pretty quick movement. And there's two. So there's LMFP. So think about it this way. Sodium ion has a density of about 120 watts per kilo of material. LFP, best in class, is 180. LMFP is around 240. High nickel is around 280, and LMR, which is called lithium manganese rich, is around 290 to 300. So LMR is what General Motors and Volkswagen and all those guys said they want to go to by 2030. That has no cobalt, and it has around 3/4 less nickel, and it's replaced by manganese. So they like that a lot. So the very high-end, longest-range cars will be lithium manganese rich. Stationary storage and sort of your cheaper cars that don't have that range, maybe range of 500, 600, 700 kilometers, that will be the LMFP. And I think you'll see a movement in that. Again, I continue to need the science to improve. Otherwise, I'll be wrong again, which I'm used to it. But that's sort of where it is. Now, who has that technology and how that technology moves forward is really important. And that's when, Firebird Metals, who I've been, much of this trip I've been with some of the management, they have a technology that they made in China, but they also have patented here in Perth. By the end of this year, they're supposed to have a plant that mirrors their Chinese plant running. So welcome to come see it. I'm sure they'll be happy to have you by. But what it's really cool is it reduces the number of parts in the value chain. They start with ore and they come out with a cathode. So everybody else in the world starts out with an ore, and then they make sort of a high manganese product. And then they take that high manganese product, they process it again, and then that can be used to make a PCAM, just a cathode without the lithium. Then they can put that into a crystal again, and then they dissolve it again and make it into a CAM. The Firebird process is you start with ore and come out with CAM. So you reduce all those parts of the value chain. And the companies I've always tried to work with since I've left McKinsey either leapfrog China, like Pure Lithium does a lithium metal anode that does 10,000 cycles, super cool, or sort of is the best Chinese technology, which Firebird is. So I wanted to be in one of those two camps.
Is that CAM then just sent straight to a gigafactory?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you would. So the battery maker has to be involved here, and they would sort of tell Firebird, this is exactly we want the have the CAM to be made, and they would have to adjust there. But what they do is The biggest part about battery, what makes a battery work, is the purity of the materials. So I work with a company called Pure Lithium. CATL's best lithium metal battery, it's called solid state. I think they announced 600 cycles. So it can be charged and discharged 600 times, which is sort of worthless. You need 1,500 charges to do a car or most consumer electronics. Pure Lithium, they're using a lithium piece of metal that's rolled. It's tough to roll lithium. It's like Play-Doh. It sort of separates. But they roll a 20-micron thick lithium metal. It's 99.0% pure. Pure Lithium makes a 99.9999% pure lithium. They use electrolysis, so it's sort of just take brine and it goes through their membrane and it plates to copper. They've already got 10,000 cycles. And so what they're saying is all these semi-solid state, solid state batteries, anything that uses lithium metal, the reason they don't work very well, it's not because they're using the wrong solid or they're using not enough pressure or whatever. It's the original ingredient sucks. The lithium metal is just not good enough. And so no matter what you do, so the same is true with manganese. The better the purity of the material, the better the quality of the battery. And so by Firebird making a 99, and I think they're going to have a 4.9s manganese. Like there's nothing other things to mess it up because it's always that in a lithium metal battery, it's 99% pure. It's that 1% that is sort of causing sort of issues. And what happens is you can actually see it under an electron microscope. Here's your anode of lithium. And as the lithium sort of plates and deplates back and forth, it starts dragging stuff. And if it pierces sort of the difference between the separator and the anode, that's what you get your YouTube video of your car on fire. So that's called dendritic formation. Like little stalactites sort of form off, and they pierce. And these you can use a separator. Some of them are even it could go through steel. Like it's amazing the power of lithium in these little tiny batteries. But it's that other 1% that's causing this to form. What Pure is saying, if we're pure, there's nothing else. And it's so far, I mean, like I said, they bury the Chinese in every technology. So companies that have that purity tend to win. And so I'm trying to find companies that can make those purities.
Where's if that thesis is true, that manganese is one of the next major metals, and considering what 90% of manganese is used in steel production at the moment, is the money made in the mining of it or in the battery chain?
It should be in the refining of it because even if I have very high demand numbers for batteries, probably higher than anybody, and I can guarantee you I'm the most in seeing LMR and LMFP. It would be about 5 million tons by 2035 in a 25 million ton market. Like it would help manganese, but it's not going to be like what happened to nickel, what happened to cobalt, what happened to lithium. I mean, lithium's 90-some% batteries. That market's too large, which is the reason why it's compelling for the OEMs. So it helps. Yeah, the higher the grade, the lower the cost because you just have to do less processing for it. So things like, Aramet's Gabonese ore is 44%. That's like mother's milk for any mag because it's so high to begin with. So that sort of helps you, but I don't think you're going to see a boom in manganese prices.
So there's more chance of lithium doubling than manganese doubling.
Easily, just because of the size of the market.
Yeah.
And that's, again, why it compelled me to it is it's such a big market, it won't move the needle as much as everything else.
I guess to finish the chemistry...
You're getting an education here, aren't you?
Oh, mate, so is everyone. But I get it first because I get it before it's released. And you mentioned it before, are people being hesitant coming back into the lithium market with this thesis that sodium ion's going to be the next technology? Is it always going to be there, but proof's going to be in the pudding eventually?
I think so. I mean, I think overall the battery market has, up and down the value chain, has burned everybody. I mean, you have seen endless amounts of failures, particularly in the battery space. You saw Northvolt. You saw Li-Cycle, which was a recycling company. You saw Frere, which was a big battery company in Finland. You've seen endless number. And so when I go to see investors with my latest whiz-bang company that I think is going to be phenomenal, they say, Ken, we saw 40 of these guys. When actually I left McKinsey, I was going to go to one of the big private equity funds I advised, and they're like, and the head guy was he's like, they called me Dr. No, because I said no to everything. Because you could see it was a great presentation, but it had nothing behind it. It didn't have the science. Now I think you're starting to see the science come up, but there's still a huge reticence on the part of investors who have just been burnt so bad. Now, AI sort of changes all that. because like I have not, this is the first time in the last 6 months I've seen, when I go to battery conferences, it's Microsoft making a presentation, Google making a presentation. Tesla is suddenly back at battery. You hadn't seen Tesla at battery shows for a couple of years. They're all back. So you're starting to see that AI money come back. And when the AI money starts to say, look, our problem with AI is batteries, all of a sudden investors are going to be like, oh, and now that's going to trickle down to us, because at the end of the day, lithium metal is going to give them the best attributes they need for their for their humanoid robots and their stationary storage and all those other things. I think they'll make investments in sodium ion, and they keep on making investments in molten salt and fuel cells, and like they'll have a couple legs in that basket. But I do think AI is going to force some money back into this industry, which is good.
If we look at it holistically, we've talked about a lot of metals and materials today, which, if you're going to put your cock on the block for one, as the one that has the strongest demand outlook but the thinnest development pipeline.
Well, I mean, manganese is my favorite, just because there's only two companies in the West that make high purity manganese. They're both Vibrance, which is a private company, and Nippon Denko out of Japan. We need somebody in the West to make a high purity manganese. I hope it's Firebird, but I think it will be someone. But whoever cracks that nut, I think will do very, very well. In terms of lithium, who can figure out DLE? The problem with DLE, and no one has been able to crack this nut. Nobody. So no matter what you see out there in the press releases, they're not telling you the truth. And the same true with like rare. You hear all these refining technologies coming to fore for rare earths, for antimony, for lithium. They all fall down in the fact that they need to. So you take a brine in, it's going to have lithium, but it's going to have iron, boron, manganese. It can't separate between the lithium and things that are like lithium. And so what happens is, your plant just doesn't work. So all the announcements you've seen, and there's some big mining companies in here, they don't work. And when you go to the plant, it's sort of like what happens is, it's grabbing the lithium, but it's also grabbing the iron or boron or something else. It does a white sort of caking on top of sort of the material that's supposed to grab the lithium, and then you sort of shut the whole thing down. You turn it out, you clean it out, you put in new stuff, and then it cakes right again, because you need a technology that only sees lithium and doesn't see other things. I do know a company that solved it, but they have no patent protection, so they've been very, very slow to market. But there are ways. I do get to see, I'm on the board of advisors for a number of these battery shows. I get to see a lot of this tech. It is coming down the pipe. It does need to be financed, and the IP has to sort of be figured out. But I think there are good days ahead, and I think you will find those technologies. So I think lithium metal, manganese are two areas where you're really going to see some pretty good developments over the next few years. I think I wouldn't like cobalt. I think cobalt's going to be completely worked out of batteries. Nickel is going to it's going to see demand growth, but it's going to shrink its share of the battery. So you're going to see more overall demand offset by less per battery. So it's probably not going to be that growth area. On the anode side, I do like lithium metal, but until it can come to fore, you will see, be it synthetic, natural, or hard carbon for sodium ion. Those are some areas that will be okay, but I wouldn't like them 10 years from now.
So what potential for lithium to start replacing graphite on the anode? Is that right?
Definitely. Yeah, this company I was talking about, Pure Lithium, there is no graphite at all. It is just copper, 3 to 10 microns of lithium, separator, and then your cathode. They're using regular cathode. But Pure is what's really cool is the cost of the battery, the most expensive part is the LFP material. It's not the lithium, which is really, really cool because everyone else it pays a lot of money for lithium metal. They don't have to in their process. So they're cool about you're really, really excited about the opportunity. What's cool about Pure Lithium is their first generation cell uses iron phosphate simple, right? Their second generation, which gets double the density, is vanadium. What's interesting is the world's largest source of vanadium is in Venezuela, actually. And when you refine their crude, you're left with very high vanadium, up to 90% pure vanadium. Sort of interesting that the U.S. sort of controls that right now. So I think vanadium is also not in flow batteries, but as a simple cathode, long-term going to be, like when I come back maybe a year or two from now, we'll be talking a lot more about vanadium.
Do you think vanadium redox flow batteries are going to?
No.
Not, and why is that?
Too expensive. I mean, the
great theory.
Lithium, great theory, but all these other batteries out there, their problem is the cost of a lithium cell has dropped 21 of the last 22 years. It just keeps. So what I thought was a good number when 8 years ago when vanadium flow really got exciting, was they thought, all right, well, the cost for a stationary storage pack, we think we can target, I think they were targeting like $150 per kilowatt hour. That's going to be where we're going to eventually get to. And at the time, lithium ion were like 300. Today, CATL is going to ship you that same pack for $77. So that 150 number that I was targeting, who cares? And so the ability of lithium cells to just constantly get cheaper has just sort of, all competitors have sort of falling by the wayside. Now, when does that stop? I don't know. I mean, that's what you always say, like, well, it can't get any cheaper than this. But it's like, yeah, but 4 years ago when it was double the price today, you said it couldn't get any cheaper than that. It used to be like, well, if the price of batteries get below $100 a kilowatt hour, then that's it for it is now. And that's why China is 65% EVs. That's why Europe is going high, because it is cheaper than that. And it keeps getting cheaper every single year.
Mate, to finish off, been so thankful for your time. This has been sensational. I've got to rewatch it 7 times to take it in. The US investment, because like the US holds, 15% of MP materials, 10% of USA rare earths. They've got equity in Lithium Americas. They've got preferred stock in an alumina refinery. They've got a $2.5 billion war chest to buy metals above market prices. If this investment from the US continues in the next 12 months, where do you think you're going to see some of the biggest money put towards?
Well, first off, it's not new. I mean, Tesla wouldn't be in business if it wasn't for the U.S. government. They got both bailed out by the California government and the federal government, which is interesting. Those are both Democrats who did that. So the U.S. has a history of quietly, of course, when the Democrats did it, the Republicans said that's the most wrong, and now that Republicans are doing it, the Democrats are saying it's. So I think we have a history of doing this in a different form. I do think, again, I'm seeing more and more and more at these battery shows, AI guys showing up left, right, and center. I've had humanoid robotic guys come up to me and say, we need batteries, we need better batteries, we need more batteries. So I think the U.S. government's really going to start shifting towards and making investments in the battery value chain. Will it be direct into, say, the lithium business? I don't think so. But I do think it'll be in the refining part of the lithium business and the cathode business, et cetera. But I think they'll start to turn and have battery plants not for EVs, but for all these other uses. And I think that does stoke demand. Again, as long as it's AI data trained, and it's all being driven by AI, everything. I mean, it's sort of said to a guy like, how is this wire robotics suddenly exploding? It's all AI. Everything comes back to AI. And as long as this boom continues, I think it gets tighter and tighter and tighter in demand as well. I think it ends poorly. I'm almost certain it's going to end poorly. I went through the .com. It's identical. People are saying this is different. No, it's not. There was a guy with a sock puppet who was worth $2 billion, pets.com or whatever it was. And people throw money at sort of stupid things and justify it. Look, the whole industry here is talking its own book because they're making so much money from it. But it's gone way, way too far. And so I think it does end poorly. But until it ends, I think it goes higher. Everything goes higher and higher and higher and higher.
And as we said at the start before we recorded, it could be a week away, it could be 4 years away.
Exactly.
It's like Greenspan's comments in 97.
You'll wake up one morning and it will say, news out of NVIDIA, one of their AI data centers defaulted on its debt of $20 billion. And all of a sudden it's going to be like, wait a second, and we're going to have a rough go of it. But until then, I think it's happy days.
Well, remember .com, I think Greenspan's comments in 97, the rational exuberance, and then NASDAQ pretty much tripled after that.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden you just started to hear, this one sort of defaulted on this, so this one, and then the money dried up, and then all of a sudden it was just like boom, 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 boom. But right now it looks good. I mean, I guess the next bogey is Anthropic going public. Apparently they're putting out great numbers. They're going to try to get that out this year. If that goes well, we'll have another one until the other AI company, ChatGPT, if they try to, but they're pushing it back quite a bit.
Because Anthropic had taken over them, I think.
I think they are too.
So once the private credit
and Musk is
dries
coming back with his Gronk thing. It seems like it's a lot of competitive, but it's, I wonder when they run out of money. I mean, there's just so much debt offering and just so much money. Sooner or later, the money's going to run out. And then at that point, things get tough.
Yep, mate. Well, I'll have you back on to talk about it when that happens, mate. Ken, mate, thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy your time in Australia, and I hope the bloody weather improves. It's a shit day today. I want to give
Beautiful
you some
weekend.
sun. It was beautiful on the weekend, but thank you so much, mate, for coming on LEVRD. I've had an absolute ball.
Anytime.
So I hope everyone understood all that. Thanks, mate.
All right, thanks a lot.